For those of you who don't know me, my name is Janalia Macbeth, and I am the author of the best-selling book, ScrapStashtic Quilts, organizing your scrap fabric stash and actually using it. And I spend most of my professional time traveling around the country and teaching this system through my lectures. So I'm going to condense it down. Normally it's an hour and 15. We've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and teach it to you just the bare bones. There's plenty more content in the book. There's plenty more things that you can learn from reading the book. There's even more that you can learn from hearing me speak, because that's the only place you'll get to see my quilts. But I'm going to give you an overview, and then I'm going to teach you the part of the book that you don't get to see anywhere but here. So the system of my book is that you're going to make a few small physical changes in your sewing room that's going to encourage you to have better habits with your scrap quilting. I know there are people out there who love scrap quilting. I know there are people who it's not their cup of tea. I scrap quilt in self-defense. So I've built this system so that my sewing room does not get overwhelmed in scraps. Over here you can see all of my scrap bins, and this is my schnitzel bin. We'll come back to that later and talk. But the skill that I'm going to be demoing today is expressed here in this flowchart. And it's going to show you exactly my Speedy method for carving up scraps. You'll notice that I do this in a hurry because, again, these are scraps and I want to get them out of my space. Scraps, when they look like this, take up a bunch of space, and it's not appealing to work with them. I've got, hours of work to do here before I can sit down and sew at my machine. Whereas when I get my pre-cuts, and keep in mind, these are all of my scraps right here, all I have to do to sew is open the bin and start to sew. So that's what makes it so easy to dive into my system and get started. It helps that you're not limited to using my system. You can take these pre-cuts and use them for anybody else's quilt that seems like it will work. This is my brick. This has my random width strips. This is the bin that fills up the fastest. So I tend to have a lot of quilts that make use of these. If you caught the email that I sent last night, you heard me mention that I have an announcement coming. We'll bring this back in a minute and show you what to do. So my sizes are 2.5 inch squares, 2 7/8 inch squares, because again, this is scrap quilting. I'm lazy, I'm in a hurry, and my 2 7/8 is going to make my half square triangles and make them quick enough that I can just slap them in a scrap quilt and be done with them. So we start with a scrap, line it up. Now typically, good sewing habit says that you should be using the ruler. These are scraps. What do I care? I want them out of my room as fast as possible. So I'm going to line up the one edge, and look, I can go this far, but I'm just going to go for the straight edge that's closest to there. Line it up. Notice that I'm using the actual grid. Some people say, oh, it's not neat enough. Some people use it, whatever. If I'm going to do a primary quilt, I'll use a see-through ruler and measure with the ruler. When I'm carving scraps, I'm in a hurry. I want them off my plate and ready to use as quick as possible. So I do measure with the mat. Now this is a schnitzel. This goes in that schnitzel bin that I showed you before. These are pieces of fabric that are too small to use, and I will combine them with batting scraps and use them to stuff dog beds, toys, apples, monsters, whatever I'm making. So there's only fabric and batting scraps in here, no thread, no trash. Back to this scrap. Now I could leave this whole. It's 2.5, so I could cross cut it, but this is such a pretty stripe, I'm going to keep this just because I like it. That's going to go right in the random width strip bin. Here's another one. Line it up. Now this one's a little more jagged. If I've got a straight line, I'm going to line it up. If I don't, I'm not going to worry about it. Find the closest straight line. Whack off those schnitzels. And yay, let's do 2.5 again. Carve it up. Just speed. 1, 2.5. Notice that I count on my fingers. I do that a lot. I'm not looking at the numbers. If you can see down here, I've got my numbers upside down because it just doesn't matter. There's not quite enough over here for a square, but I will keep 1.25 inches. So we'll see, does it fit? Yeah, close enough. That can be a random width strip. Oops, threw it on the floor. I'll pick it up later. All right, now I've got these. If I want to cross cut them, they're all in 2.5 inch, so I can stack them up and cut like so. 1/2, 1, 2 on the line. 1, 2 and 1/2. Where'd it go? There's the 1/2. There we go. Surprisingly challenging to try and do this through a camera lens, but you can see how it's just a quick process of carving up the scraps, and it doesn't take very long before the chaos that you've got over here in this scrap bin melts away to a tidy little pile that's ready to go. You're ready to sew with these. Now, what do I make with them? I make a ton of quilts. My book, you will find all of the different seeds of ideas of what to do with these pre-cuts. There are graphics instead of images, because ultimately I want you to find your own voice in scrap quilting. Scrap quilting is a great place to experiment. It's a great place to try things out. And it's a great place to make your charity quilts that fulfill your guild obligations and keep on top of the mess in your sewing room. So you can take any of these ideas and change them based on what scraps you have available to you. Any questions so far? And hey, you know, if you send me some emojis, that would just make my day, because those are so much fun when the little hearts and smiley faces and likes pop up. Yeah, I would love that if you sent me some emojis, and let me know if you have any questions. I call this my brick. This is the bin that fills up the quickest. These are my random width strips. They're anywhere from 1.25 inches. Oh, I got a like, woohoo! Oh, it's some hearts. You guys are awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Anyway, these fill up the quickest, so I'm always looking for a way to quick sew these together. A lot of times, and a lot of those recipes that you saw in the book, I will use to create what I call strippy fabric. So I've got an example of strippy fabric over here. This is pared down and ready to make a coins quilt. That's what I was working on this week. But you can cross-cut this strippy fabric into all different sizes and shapes. Those of you who have seen my trunk show, there's a point where I bring out a whole collection of red and black quilt samples. Best source for my plastic bins, believe it or not, Dollar Tree. But back in the day, before I was fancy enough to shop at Dollar Tree, I used to use salad boxes. Like if you went and got like a fancy box of spring mix at the grocery store. I do limit the size of the bins that I have, because if I kept getting bricks and bins filled with scraps, I would just be hoarding fabric in a different manner. The trick is, when the bins fill up, you make a quilt. As you can see, all of my bins are about full. Definitely the strippy bin is, the random width strips is full. So that's why I'm currently working on strippy fabric quilts. So do you want to see the secret announcement? This is new. I haven't told anybody about this. I've hinted just a little bit to the people on my email list. I have a new pattern that's releasing on May 28th. 28th? 26th. The Tuesday. Oh my goodness, I don't even remember the date. Whatever that Tuesday is. May 26th, I believe. And Tamarini's is also releasing a pattern on that day. So the pattern that I'm releasing uses those random width strips that have been turned into your strippy fabric like this. And then they get turned into chevrons. So this is the first look at this quilt. Whoa, anybody get seasick? Hold still, there we go. This one is, this one hasn't been quilted yet, but you can see here's the strippy fabric. It's been cut and it's been put together with focus fabric and then arranged in such a way to create the chevrons. Oh, thank you, Lynn. And here it is in a larger quilt, so you can see there's borders. It's so pretty. I'm so excited. So I'd like to thank you guys for stopping by to see how I quickly carve up my scraps and dump my schnitzels in my schnitzel bin to use as fabric stuffing. And I reduce my scraps to those 3 pre-cut sizes that I showed you. And yeah, I keep my bins small so that they take up very little space in my room. Every time the bin is full, I make a quilt. If you'd like to learn more about the ScrapStashtic system and how to implement it in your sewing room, you can in fact find it on Amazon. I did not bother to put a link there because I was so excited about that new pattern that I sent you guys the link in the comments for this new pattern. Eileen, the sizes for the pre-cuts are 2.5 inch squares, 2 7/8 inch squares, and then my random width strips. My random width strips are any length, and they are anywhere between 1.25 inches and 3 inches wide. Those go into that strippy fabric, which then can make any number of the quilts that are in the recipe section of my book, or they are on this section, you know, in this new pattern. Thank you guys so much for joining me with the Designer Tips and Techniques virtual show. The next stop on your tour is Jen Frost. She's going to do a demonstration on foundation paper piecing. Looks like it's going to be really, really fantastic. There's a link in the descriptions that will take you over there to see what she's doing. Thank you all so much. Hey, before we go, would you give me one more flood of emojis just to make my day and make me feel like I've done a good job? And yeah, that's it. Have a fantastic day. Happy quilting. Happy scrap quilting.